It is a story that, in theory, the NFL already knows how it ends. A team starts the season with 3 straight losses, the media hits the panic button, debate shows shift the conversation to mock drafts, and around the rest of the league, everyone starts treating that team as a statistic, not a threat. That is exactly what happened to the Houston Texans in 2025. After falling to 0-3 with a 17-10 loss in Week 3 to the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road, a game filled with mistakes, turnovers, and wasted opportunities, the consensus was simple. This season was over. The problem is that the NFL got the Texans completely wrong. Wrong in the numbers, wrong in the narrative, wrong in the way it looked at a young team that was still figuring itself out. When the phrase "this was impossible" enters this story, it is not talking about a lack of confidence inside the locker room. It is talking about the disbelief of everyone on the outside. While the league placed Houston on the same shelf as so many other 0-3 starts that turned to dust, the Texans were about to enter a tiny group, teams that defied the statistics and charged toward the playoffs when no one else believed. Since 1980, only 7 teams have managed to start 0-3 and still reach the postseason, and the Texans are the only franchise to do it twice, in 2018 and in 2025. Think about the weight of that. Decades of the NFL, hundreds of combined seasons, dozens of rosters that started 0-3 talking about "we will respond. There is still time, 1 week at a time." Almost all of them fell by the wayside. Fewer than 4% of those teams managed to turn it around and reach January playing football that actually meant something. In 2025, Houston not only joined that club, but also repeated its own 2018 story, showing that if there is one franchise that refuses to accept 0-3 as a death sentence, it is this one. When the clock hit 0 in that 17-10 game in Jacksonville, the feeling was déjà vu, but in the worst way. A stalled offense, penalties at critical moments, turnovers at the worst possible time, and a defense keeping the game alive for far too long. The kind of game that makes a commentator drop the classic line, "If they lose today, the season practically ends here." And they lost. That was the moment when 0-3 stopped being theory and became reality in the standings. Since 1981, only 6 teams had managed to escape that hole. The 7th, no one knew it yet, but it was already wearing blue, red, and white. The media was not unfair to Houston at that moment. It was mathematical. Historically, 0-3 teams do not respond. They do not turn it around. They do not become a January storyline, except on lists of who might trade players at the trade deadline. The standard script is simple. The calendar keeps moving. The team starts thinking more about draft position than playoff seeding, and the outside noise fades because the season becomes a footnote. It is almost always like this. Almost. Because 2018 had already proven that the Texans do not operate on almost always, and that is exactly why the 2025 turnaround hits so hard with any Texans fan. It is not just about getting back to the playoffs. It is about challenging, once again, a logic the NFL itself has repeated for decades. A young team with new pieces in key spots, led by a head coach who is still solidifying his own identity, should not be the protagonist of a run like this. Not after an 0-3 start. Not after losing on the road to a divisional rival in a game where everything seemed to be going backward. But it was from that rock bottom that the story began to change its tone. Week by week, the Texans adjusted details, cut down on unforced errors, found the right personnel combinations, and most importantly, discovered who they truly were as a team. The outside perception was still lost season, but inside the building the message began to change. There was no room for tanking, no room to think about April. Every snap became an opportunity to prove that 0-3 was the beginning of the story, not the end. The key here is understanding that this run was not a 3 or 4 week hot streak where everything randomly went right. When you look at the stretch of the season after that 0-3 start, the trend line is clear. Houston put together a winning run that, when added up, forms a block of 9 consecutive victories within the comeback narrative, carrying the team from a catastrophic start all the way to clinching a wildcard spot. It is that sequence, built step by step, that gives substance to the phrase "this was impossible." Because when you combine the 0-3 start with what came after, it becomes obvious that no spreadsheet projected what this roster delivered on the field. And that is what makes this story so powerful for Texans fans. It is not just the number of wins, it is the context. A team that was treated as a dead statistic in September went through the entire calendar piling up wins in tight games, late comebacks, defensive performances that forced the result through sheer effort, and an offense that kept maturing under the very real pressure of every week is elimination. Each win in that surge was another piece of a statistical miracle being built in front of a league that swore this would not happen again. So when the playoff berth finally came, it was not just a 0-3 team reaches the postseason. It was the Houston Texans, for the second time, defied a probability that almost everyone treats as zero. It was the definitive stamp that this roster was not interested in repeating the NFL's logic. It was interested in breaking that logic. Inside the locker room, impossible was never an option. On the outside, it was the only word that seemed to make sense. And it is in the collision between these two worlds that this story finds its strength. Now that you understand the historical weight of that 0-3 start, it is time to talk about what actually flipped this season. What happened on the field, player by player, adjustment by adjustment, until that 9-game winning sequence clicked and pushed Houston into the wild card. Because it is not enough to say the team got better. In the NFL, everyone says that. What sets the 2025 Texans apart is that this improvement shows up in the details, in the quarterback's reads, in the defense's consistency on third downs, in the efficiency of an offense that went from invisible to functional and then to dangerous. At the center of all of this is C.J. Stroud. The league's narrative after the 0-3 start was of a stalled offense, calling overly conservative plays with little creativity and a quarterback under pressure on every snap. But from the moment the system truly began to revolve around what Stroud does best, quick ball distribution, smart use of play action, and attacking the intermediate areas of the field, the offensive production numbers began to rise steadily over the course of the season. Instead of becoming just a game manager trying not to make mistakes, he took on the role of the offensive engine, leading long drives, comebacks in critical moments, and late-game series where every pass carried the weight of the season. But it was not only the offense that reached another level. The Texans' defense was, at many points, the safety line that kept the season alive while the offensive machine was still adjusting. Against divisional rivals, against offenses that knew Houston's playbook inside and out, this group specialized in ugly games won on the margins, limiting big plays, forcing mistakes in the red zone, turning long third downs into punts, and giving the offense another chance and then another and another. And within that unit, the pass rush played a fundamental role, with a combination of constant edge pressure and interior defensive line production that forced opposing quarterbacks to speed up their reads and take sacks in decisive moments. That balance began to show up most clearly in the final stretch of the regular season. With each win in that 9-game block, it became more obvious that Houston had found its identity. The offense no longer needed to score 30 points to win because the defense held the score when the game tightened. At the same time, when the defense gave up field position, the offense responded with surgical drives that drained the clock, moved the chains on third downs, and put points on the board exactly when the narrative seemed about to fall apart again. It was a team that knew how to suffer during a game, something rare for such a young roster. DeMeco Ryans is the glue that holds all of this together. It is no coincidence that a turnaround of this magnitude happened under a head coach who carries his own leadership history within the franchise, who understands the city, the fan base, and what it means to wear this uniform. Keeping a locker room together through an 0-3 start is not just about motivational speeches. It is about making tough decisions, changing pieces on the offensive line, adjusting the defensive rotation, tweaking the offensive game plan without losing the group. Throughout the surge, you could see on the field a team that believed in the plan even when the score was tight, even when a call went wrong. That collective confidence is the kind of thing that does not show up on a spreadsheet, but it explains why such a young roster was able to handle so much pressure. And all of it leads to the wild card. Getting there after an 0-3 start would already be historic on its own. Getting there fueled by a 9-game winning streak within the comeback narrative, with a quarterback who matured under fire, a defense that learned how to win playoff-style games before January even arrived, and a head coach who consolidated his philosophy in record time, puts this campaign on a different level. The playoff berth was not an accident. It was not the result of half a dozen outside outcomes breaking the right way. It was the logical conclusion of a team that, week after week, stacked performances consistent enough to turn microscopic probabilities into reality. That is why, when someone says, "This was impossible about this Texans season," the phrase carries much more than emotion. It is, in practice, an answer to the NFL's own logic, which usually buries 0 and 3 teams without a second thought. The official regular season numbers show exactly the opposite. A roster that climbed from the bottom of the standings to compete on equal footing in January, sustained by real production on the field, by statistics that tell the story of continuous growth, and by a mindset that refused to accept the fate everyone on the outside had already written. And in the end, that is what makes this run something any Texans fan can look at and say, without exaggeration, "This was not supposed to happen, but it did." Thank you for watching and see you soon.